Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much, and all the better for coming with you tonight to share with you a fabulous story. So before we get started, go and get that effervescent sparkling drink or that lovely warm cup of coffee. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and a thumbs up. And let's start with tonight's story, shall we? Dear Sarah and all your listeners, the policeman is looking at me with a perplexed expression on his face. He wrinkles up his brow, studying me judiciously through his shrewd, keen brown eyes that really rather remind me of a bird of prey. I sense he's studying me rather curiously. I can see he's good at his job, looking at my face for any signs of guileful duplicity, to see if I'm sneakily hiding anything. But my pale white face probably looks as blank as a sheet, giving nothing away. There are grievous dark circles under my eyes, and my lacklustre blonde hair hangs limply around my face in bedraggled disarray, looking decidedly grimy. It's crying out for a wash. So I know I look a sight for sore eyes, but I really don't care if I look as if I've been dragged through a hedge backwards. This is the repercussions of being a new mother, who is not really dealing with the challenges of my role terribly well. The birth of my daughter Wren has pretty much turned our lives upside down. Right now my primary focus needs to be on Graham. Where the hell is he? I'm so troubled and perturbed by my husband's inscrutable absence, and I have this uneasy sense that something quite dreadful has happened to him. I bite my lip and avoid the officer's intense gaze, as I do not want him to see the fear in my eyes.
But surely, ma'am, if your husband was going camping for the weekend, you would know where he was going.
I sigh with frustration. My life is chaotic at the moment, officer. I have a newly born baby to think about. She consumes all my attention 24/7. So forgive me for being so distracted. My husband just mentioned he was going on a camping trip in the heat of the moment, you could say, but he never returned home. It's been a week, officer. I haven't seen sight or sound of him. That's actually why I contacted you. This unorthodox behaviour is so unlike him. I'm exceedingly worried about him, officer. You see, officer, it's not like him at all not to return home, I say with a withering tear trailing down my cheek, which I quickly brush away, as I certainly don't want the officer seeing me wrought up with emotion like this. So I straighten my back up, trying to compose myself by keeping up my stoic self-possession and collected self-control that is rarely crumbling at the seams. It's not an easy charade to execute. The officer keeps studying me through his judicious eyes that miss nothing. He pretended not to notice my tears, which I'm exceedingly glad about. If he had offered me any sympathy at all, I might have bawled my eyes out in front of him and really embarrassed myself as a result. I always try to keep a stiff upper lip. My mother told me it was most unbecoming and salacious to let people ever see your emotions or sentiment. I assure you, sweetheart, it makes people very uncomfortable when someone gets lamentably emotional. People have their own issues to deal with. They don't need to be drawn into yours. You always need to hold it together. Don't let your feelings show if you know what's good for you. I'd always abided by my mother's principles in this regard, but right now I'm barely holding it together.
But you didn't ask him where he was going,
says the officer, clearly finding this revelation of mine quite incredulous. He might have told me, officer, but I wasn't really listening or paying attention. As I was saying, it was a last-minute decision of his. He gathered his stuff and off he went very early on Saturday morning, at about 2:30, I think it was. I knew exactly what the officer was thinking. I was possibly the most dithery, tentative and disengaged person he'd ever met, so disconnected to the comings and goings of my husband that for all I knew he could have taken a rocket to Mars, and I'd be none the wiser. My face blushes bright red, as I realise that perhaps I'm not quite the dutiful wife I should have been. I'm coming across as very dispassionate and disconnected, which might be a red flag to him, feeding into the idea that I might have something to do with my husband's disappearance, when nothing could be further from the truth. My mind squeamishly flashes back to the argument we had before he left. I'd been far too angry with him to even contemplate daring to ask him where he was going, even though I knew he was going camping as he'd grabbed his backpack and camping gear. By all accounts, my head may have been in the clouds, but that's what a lack of sleep can actually do to you.
So you say he left his cell phone at home? Does he make a habit of forgetting his cell phone? It's very unusual for someone to forget their cell phone. It happens, but most people these days seem to be joined to their cell phones by the hip. It's rare for people not to be in possession of their cell phone.
I scowl at the officer. He's beginning to irritate me.
Officer, do you have any children? I ask him churlishly. No, I don't.
Well then, don't presume to know what it's like. It's easy to forget your head, let alone a cell phone, when you've got 1,000 things on your mind. For your information, I've personally forgotten my cell phone at home dozens of times. I'm certainly not joined at the hip to mine. I'm sorry, but in my opinion that would be pathetic if I allowed myself to be controlled by modern technology, I say, bristling. If you must know, I doubt Graham cared that he forgot his cell phone behind. It wasn't a big deal for him, as he wanted to get away from it all, and that means also escaping the perils of your cell phone, believe it or not. I point towards the nursery where my 5-month-old baby is lying fast asleep. You have no idea, officer, do you, what it's like for Graham and me, I say obsequiously. My baby chooses to scream and scream at night. We barely ever have a wink of sleep. My husband couldn't take it any longer. He went away for a couple of days, that's all. I think it was good he left, if you must know, because we're getting on each other's nerves. At this revelation, the officer physically stiffens, raising his back. His pencil in his hand is now tapping awkwardly. I notice he's scribbling some notes.
So you were fighting, Mrs. Ferris, with your husband Graham before he vanished. Is that what you're saying?
I don't know what you're implying. My husband did not vanish, officer. I don't care for the oblique words you're actually using. It's like you're clandestinely insinuating that I stabbed my husband to death and have buried him under the patio after a heated altercation. I take offence to that, officer. I really do. Sorry to disappoint you and to dash your hopes. But our lives are not another dramatic episode in a rather riveting, gripping Agatha Christie novel. We're ordinary people, living ordinary lives, who love each other. Yes, I was exhausted, officer. Yes, we were arguing. And yes, he did say he needed to go off for a couple of days. And yes, I didn't ask him where the hell he was going. I can assure you, officer, ask any new parents and they'll tell you about the frayed nerves and tension when you bring a new one home. It's a whole new adjustment when you have another soul depending on you. Things get heated at times, especially when you both want the best for your little baby, and you have different opinions on how things should be done and how you should raise your child. My husband and I have different conflicting opinions in this regard, but a screaming child can really throw a spanner in the works.
You say he's been gone for a week. Now, you filed your missing persons report 2 days after he disappeared. I know that. But given he is a grown man, Mrs. Ferris, I put it to you, could your husband not have chosen to take an extended break? If you say he was rather tired, he might have decided to do just that. I mean, at this stage of the game, is there any need to get inordinately alarmed like this?
Yes, there is, officer. My husband is prudently reliable, officer. I can assure you of that. He might go off for a weekend without being in contact with me, but no longer than that, without getting in touch first to explain what was going on. Suffice to say, his office was expecting him back on Tuesday morning. He'd arranged some high-profile meetings with overseas clients. I promise you he would not have missed those appointments for the world. Something has happened to him, officer, and I'm exceedingly worried about him.
So worried that you never asked where he was going, Miss Ferris. Forget me for reiterating this point, but I do find it peculiarly odd.
Look, officer, I've got a lot on my plate at the moment. Whether you find it odd or not, officer, is of no concern of mine. I don't care a jot about that. You need to be doing your job, don't you? You need to help me find my husband. I don't know why you're wasting your time asking me these stupid questions. All this nonsensical stuff, it's absolutely ridiculous. You need to be out there looking for my husband. He could be hurt. He could be lying in a ditch somewhere. And you're just sitting here,
Doing nothing! Look, Mrs. Ferris, I'm doing my job as best as I can. There is no point in searching for your husband until we've established some facts. Otherwise, we'll be chasing after fresh air, and that won't get us anywhere. I'm afraid questions need to be asked. Do you have your husband's truck details? That might be a start to try and locate the whereabouts of his vehicle, and put out an alert to keep an eye out for it. Well, I don't know what they are, officer, of course, but I guess I could find the paperwork for you. It's probably in the desk in the office. But surprise, surprise, I say sarcastically, I don't know his registration number. Now I know you're going to be horrified about that, officer. Well, it would be very helpful if you could find the details. Where do you think he'd have gone camping at a guess? You must have some rough idea. I imagine you've gone camping with him before. Have you got an inkling where he might have gone?
Well, he does often go on the Appalachian Trail in Fannin County from Springer Mountain. I've been on those trips with him lots of times, so I'd say that would be the obvious place to look. It's only an hour away from where we live, and he usually goes on that trail. But I did drive over there. I didn't see his truck in the parking bay there. It's a silver Ford Escape. I would have noticed it at once if it had been there. I know exactly where he'd park. We've done the trail, as I say, lots of times, which leads me to conclude that he may have gone somewhere else, but I can't think where.
Well, we'll get people to search that part of the trail for you. You say he's familiar with it. In my experience, people tend to take routes they're very well acquainted with. Did he go with anyone on this trip?
I think I'd have told you if he had, officer, I say gingerly.
Another thing, Mrs. Ferris. What was your husband's state of mind? What's that supposed to mean?
The officer looks uncomfortable as he clears his throat. This time his eyes deliberately drop to the carpet in my living room, avoiding my gaze.
I mean, Miss Ferris, did your husband have any issues with depression or any kind of mental problems you can think about? How was his behaviour when he left the house on Saturday morning? You say he left very early.
I can't believe this, officer. What on earth are you trying to suggest? That my husband went off to commit suicide? To kill himself? Absolutely not. He'd never ever do that. He's got far too much to live for. Besides, he adores our baby. He'd never willingly abandon us like that. Never, never. Besides, my husband doesn't get depressed. Yes, he does have moments when life can be overwhelming for him. But don't we all? We have our on and off days. But it doesn't mean we want to put a bullet through our heads, does it?
I'm sorry, Mrs. Ferris. I had to ask that question. But what about his mood when he left your home after your fight? Might I be so impertinent to ask what the fight was actually about?
Do you really need to know something so trivial, so personal? I ask, feeling my heckles rise in indignation. Aren't some things meant to be private, officer? Or do I have to bare my whole soul to you?
Not when I'm trying to find your husband, Mrs. Ferris. I need to build up a clear picture in my head of everything that happened before he left your home. It might seem insignificant to you, I know, but in my line of work, sometimes it's the ambiguously obscure details that can give us a profound revelatory answer and help us to find the whereabouts of a missing person.
If I'm trying to remember, officer, exactly what we were fighting about, it was so trivial, so insignificant. Let me think for a moment, I say, pausing to reflect. Oh, it was about how many times I was feeding my baby. My husband insisted that every time our baby cried, she didn't always need a feed, and that I should sometimes ignore her when she cries, because then she'll stop. But I couldn't ignore her, officer. I just couldn't. I have to see she's all right. It was just a silly argument, that's all. Nothing serious.
So how was he then when he left? His mood, I mean.
He just said that he'd had enough of our bickering and needed a break and he was going away for the weekend.
What did you say?
I said, typical. When things get tough, you always run away.
I see, said the officer. So how did he leave? Did he slam the door and drive away in haste?
I flush pink. Something like that, officer. Yes, he was angry with me. He wasn't particularly happy.
Did you see how well equipped he was for his trip? What kind of camping gear he took with him?
No, I didn't, but I can imagine, officer. My husband always kept a backpack fully prepared for an adventure, so he'd have everything prepared. I can assure you of that. He's a very organised man,
He always has his backpack filled with dehydrated food and bottles of drink and matches, torches, batteries, compasses, and everything you could possibly need for a camping trip. So, Mrs. Ferris, does your husband go camping solo often? He's done it all his life, officer. This is not something new for him. He loves the great outdoors. He loves the natural world and wild animals. He says it gives him perspective and peace of mind. When I met my husband, we camped together frequently on the Appalachian Trail. But since we've had the baby, we've been inactive in that regard. Thank you for your help, Mrs. Ferris. You've been most informative. I'll be in touch very soon, says the officer, getting up to leave. Oh, by the way, I spoke to Mrs. Ferris, your husband's mother. You mean Prunella? You spoke to Prunella? That's right. I think I should warn you she's in a bit of a state. You contacted her? You contacted her? That's right. Yes, I did. She needed to answer some questions for me. I groaned. Once the officer left, within 20 minutes, as I was expecting, my mother-in-law's car rolls down our driveway, and I know that things are going to get a hell of a lot more uncomfortable for me, as she bombards me with all kinds of awkward questions and willfully accuses me of her son's disappearance. I can see the woman slamming the door of her silver Mazda behind her, and trotting up to the front door, wheeling a Gucci suitcase behind her, with some clothes sticking out through the sides of the case. My guess is she threw her entire wardrobe in there and jammed it shut. Well, are you going to let me in or not? Says my mother-in-law. She stands there in the doorway looking as dishevelled as I feel. I've never seen her look like this before. I notice she's wearing her pink cashmere sweater inside out, and her hair is a heaped mess over her face, as the usual glamorous chignon looks like it's gallantly escaped its austere hold. Well, don't just stand there, will you, looking so gormless? Are you going to let me in or not? Sorry, Prunella, I say, beckoning her inside. I'm all over the place. Prunella gives me a scathing look as she drags her suitcase into the house, dumping it next to the hall table and following me into the kitchen. People visiting me at my home tend to gravitate towards my kitchen, as our coffee machine surreptitiously calls to them, and there's some kind of a magnetic pull going on there. Why did you not tell me that Graham was missing, dear? She says, looking at me accusingly through her earnest blue eyes. When the police informed me that he's been missing for a week, I nearly did my nut. Graham's father wanted to come here too, but I told him I'll handle things while he mans the fort back at home. I'm going to be moving in with you for a while. You're going to be needing my help with the baby. You can't manage on your own without Graham being around to help you. I'm sorry, Prunella. I didn't want to worry you. That's why I didn't tell you. You didn't want to worry me? Are you joking or something? Listen to yourself, dear. I'm Graham's mother. If something's happened to my son, I should be the first to be informed about this, she says, taking a seat at my kitchen counter, while I prepare the coffee machine to perform its frothy magic. She takes my mug of coffee from me with a snatch, and to my amazement she fills the mug with 7 teaspoons of sugar. Does anybody have that much sugar with their coffee? I wonder. Don't give me that judgmental look. I need this sugar. I'm feeling like a deflated alpine flower. I'm worried sick about poor Graham. I need you to tell me exactly what happened. If I knew what happened, Prunella, believe me, I would tell you. But I'm as clueless as you. That's why I called the police. But they've been a fat lot of help. I think they're going to be looking out for his truck, that's all. Checking the hiking trail. Prunella pauses for a brief moment, staring at the wilted flowers on the marble kitchen countertop that Graham had bought for me on the Friday before he disappeared. They're looking worse for wear. Some of the petals had fallen off onto the marble surface, but I didn't have the heart to throw them away. She looks at the flowers disapprovingly, sighs, gets up, and pulls them out of the vase, gathering them together in a heaped bunch, throwing them into the large pedal bin, after which she wipes down the countertop and throws away the confetti of remaining petals. Finally, she washes her hands at the fancy built-in sink and dries her hands with a hand towel. Not good energy. Has nobody told you it's not good to have dead flowers lying around the place? Mind you, they look exactly how I feel. Wilted, bedraggled and frayed. Now tell me, why did Graham go camping? I'm surprised he wasn't sticking around to help you with the baby. It's most unlike him to be this inconsiderate and selfish. He's always had a heart of gold on him, that boy. We kind of had an altercation. She raises one of her brows. I might have guessed you were behind this. You've always had a bit of a loose tongue on you, haven't you? You should watch yourself there. What do you mean, loose tongue, Prunella? I mean, you can sometimes say quite mean things. I've seen you from time to time. I've heard you say a few unpleasant words to my son before, when you've had a fight with him. Men don't like to be henpecked, you know. I don't henpeck Graham at all, I say defensively, irked by the unreasonable accusation that is tarnishing my character in a rather unfavourable way. If you must know, it was the other way round. He was the one goading me. Look, let's not squabble about this, shall we? I'm on your side, you know, sweetheart. I'm here to help with you and the baby, and to get to the bottom of this rather perturbing mystery. Regretfully, Graham has done this before. I had to tell the police about this, as they were asking me all kinds of awkward questions, and I wasn't about to lie to them. They need to know absolutely everything. What do you mean Graham has done this before? I asked, looking bewildered. Well, Graham has always had a bit of a habit of disappearing for a while, going camping when he was young, when things got on top of him, you know. When he got a wee bit overwhelmed, you could say. It would be his way to manage stress, I guess, by getting reconnected with nature. I remember when he was 18 years old, me and my husband were beside ourselves with worry, as Graham was gone for an entire week. He just vanished without a bye or leave. We sent out a search party to look for him, and then a week later he just returns home as if nothing had ever happened, claiming he'd left us a note to tell us exactly where he was. But we never received that note. We think he conveniently made that up as an afterthought when he realised the pandemonium he'd actually caused, and was feeling significantly bashful for his apathy. I could have killed him. I was as mad as a hatter. But when I saw him, I melted like butter, and was so thankful he was all right. I really thought he'd learnt from that lesson. I hope to God he hasn't done that again. This is the first time I've heard about this before, but I wish to God you hadn't told the police about this, Prunella. You can bet your cotton socks they won't take his disappearance seriously now, not after what you've told them, and that's a big, big problem for me. You see, Graham may have behaved irresponsibly when he was 18 years old, but I unequivocally believe he wouldn't do that now. He has a wife and baby to worry about, and he wouldn't willfully abandon us like this. I know he wouldn't. He's been gone for a week, and I'm at the end of my tether. I feel as if something quite dreadful has happened to him. This time I know it's different, can't you see? I say, sorrowful tears spilling down my cheeks that, try as I might, I simply cannot restrain. Look, sweetheart, I know this is all so overwhelming for you, she says, taking me into her arms lovingly. I'll kill him myself, see if I don't, if he comes through that door right now, wearing that indifferent expression on his face that he had all those years ago. You never know. Maybe things just got on top of him, dear. You were saying the baby was causing you both to quibble. Maybe he just needed a little break. I'm hoping to God that's what it is. Look at you. If you don't mind my saying, you do look dreadful. You need a long soak and a hot bath, and plenty of rest. I've never seen you look so fatigued before. You should have given me and my husband a call. What are grandparents for if we can't lend a hand? And inflict you with a screaming baby? Believe me, Prunella, you'll regret offering your help. My baby's a huge handful, and when she screams the house down. It's that bad. Oh, believe me, Graham was a big screamer himself back in his day. I know what you're going through. The main thing is I'm here to help in any way that I can. I was rather surprised at what a world of difference Prunella's appearance had made in my household, as the stress of not knowing exactly where Graham was had escalated my levels of exhaustion. I felt as if I was caught up in a cyclone or whirlwind, where I couldn't actually see the wood for the trees. Prunella insisted that I got some much-needed sleep, while she took care of the baby, cooked and cleaned. It really enabled me to gain some perspective. We knew it was a waiting game, and only a matter of time when answers to Graham's whereabouts would be forthcoming. Someone must have seen or heard something, surely. But as the days passed by, you were left feeling very deflated. Prunella insisted that no news was good news, but I don't believe that's true. Look at all those 411 cases when people vanished without a single trace. I kept wondering if that might be our story with Graham, and my last memories of him would have been the pathetic fight we'd engaged in, that seemed so ridiculously trivial now I came to think of it. I was cursing myself for allowing him to leave that morning. What was I thinking? At the very least we should have resolved our differences first. One night as I'm drying the dishes by the sink with Prunella washing them in the hot soapy water, wearing a long pair of rubber gloves, We'd been chatting away after a pleasant dinner, washed down with some Cabernet Sauvignon. It would seem Graham's disappearance had sealed an unlikely bond between us, and the aloof remote woman, who I'd always felt was somewhat unapproachable, had become a good friend to me. It was like the ice had melted between the two of us, as before this unfortunate incident we barely tolerated each other, and she didn't particularly like me as her son's wife. But now, out of a shared emotional strife over Graham's fortuitous disappearance, a genuine affection had been birthed between the two of us, something that years later I would thankfully appreciate, as we soon became not just best friends, but the very best of friends. I would have given you money that would never ever have happened. Suddenly I observe a police car rolling down our long drive. It grinds to a sudden stop as the engine switches off. My heart begins to sink as I see the police officer climbing out of his car. I begin to fear the very worst. Is he going to tell us that my husband is dead? Oh my God, please no. I'm sure he's going to tell me my husband is dead. My chest begins to tighten so considerably that for a brief moment I feel as if all my breath has been sucked out of me. Prunella and I look at each other with withered expressions, our faces ashen, defeated, but very resigned. I can see fear in her eyes, and my fear is conjoined, as our tortured souls become as one. My heavy heart thunders in my chest so violently, I can feel every pounding beat, as if it's going to explode in any second, while unwelcome prickles of perspiration roll down my back like sorrowful tears. The police officer walks over to the passenger side door of his truck and opens it. It seems like an idiosyncratic thing to do, unless there's a woman in the truck with him. Maybe a female officer, I think. Although on duty, would he extend such a chivalrous protocol to one of his female colleagues? I mean, it might be falsely construed in this day and age as condescending, which in my opinion is absolutely ridiculous. Men should be encouraged to be gentlemen, not condemned for it. It's dark outside, so I can't see clearly, as I scrunch up my eyes to focus better. A soft shower of moonlight gives me a distinct impression of whom I'm seeing, as a familiar figure comes into view, as the police officer helps the shadowy figure out of the truck, who hobbles to his feet. I gasp in astonishment, cupping my hands over my mouth. "Oh my God! It's Graham! It's Graham!" I say to Prunella, my eyes gleaming brightly. "Oh my God, he's back! He's alive! The police have brought him back!" My emotions seesaw from impending dread to ebullient joy. Me and Prunella spontaneously hug each other, as our delight cannot be suppressed. So there we are. That's the end of part 1. Part 2 is tomorrow night. Until next time, goodbye and good night.